introduce Joyce Peralta from McGill University. So Joyce has been building websites and digital communities for over 20 years, 15 of which has been in the higher ed space. So she currently manages digital communications at McGill University, but she's also held positions at University of Victoria, Western University, King's University College. She's also an award-winning speaker. She's presented at many conferences across North America, DrupalCon, High Ed Web, TSE Web. So here we're really honored to have her present with us, and she's going to talk about how to build a community of practice for digital standards compliance. So give a warm round of applause to Joyce.
Thank you, Thanks everyone for coming to my presentation. I'm super excited to be here at the Toronto Reference Library. What you're going to see today is the inspiration for it actually started here at Drupal North in 2018. I think that was maybe the last time we had a big Drupal community event in Toronto. Was anybody here for that event? Oh, yeah. Good. That's great. Yeah, that was a great event. So you might actually recognize one of the slides that I'm going to show in my presentation. I'm curious, how many people here are from a university or college? Just checking to see. Great. I'm glad to see, and I hope to connect with you. I'm so excited that there's so many people from Canadian universities. Often when we connect with other universities and colleges on Drupal, they're American universities, so it's really awesome to see such a great turnout. So I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, and if you're from Toronto, you might recognize this land acknowledgement. It's from the University of Toronto. For thousands of years, this has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. And in acknowledging the land and what that means in the context of this event, I feel like we should make efforts to ensure that the commitments that our institutions or our colleges and universities make in terms of respecting Indigenous peoples is also reflected in our digital spaces. And as I know that this session might be accessed online, I'm also going to extend that to areas of the world where people may access this presentation. And I'd encourage you to go to Whose Land, that's whos.land. It's a Canadian website for learning more about the Indigenous peoples in your area. Is anybody familiar with that website, by the way? It's great. All right. I loved the start of this the sessions today. It was really neat to see Morgan's presentation on the Planned Parenthood site. We're doing a lot of EDI-related initiatives right now, and Arthur Chan's Planned Parenthood quote about equity being a choice, or equity being a fact, diversity being a choice. Those things I think are really important messages that we're all focusing on right now, so I'm glad to see that reflected so far. My name is Joyce Peralta. As Diana mentioned, I am Manager of Digital Communications at McGill University. It's the fourth university that I've worked at. And why do I mention that, or why is that important? Well, one of the reasons is that we all, probably many of us, work in large decentralized environments where things like quality control might be somewhat of a pipe dream. And I'm going to show you, this is a snapshot of what our environment looked like in 2018 when I attended that presentation here at the Toronto Reference Library. We had at the time about 900 Drupal websites, 500 non-templated sites too that are not on our centrally supported CMS, and about 1,500 active site managers. I don't know what, are there any other large Drupal installations here in attendance? What size website or what size installation are you looking at? A lot, hundreds, sometimes thousands. Yes? 90 sites. Great, yeah, that's a good size site. And I saw your hand go up as well.
I'm speaking later, so it would be a bit of a story.
Okay. So attend we'll attend your presentation.
Stay tuned.
Sounds
Stay
good.
tuned. Yes.
All right. Well, McGill's been on Drupal since about 2006, when They migrated their homegrown CMS onto the Drupal 6 platform, and then shortly after that, we migrated into Drupal 7, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that going forward. But we all know basically how difficult it is to manage quality control in a large decentralized environment. And on top of the fact that we have these large decentralized environments, we also have some fun stuff happening in the background that makes it extra difficult. So these are some images for me that reflect some of the experiences I've encountered. In the top left there, the two young women, to me, represents relationships that break down between departments where people should be collaborating together, and over time they develop serious problems with collaborating and begin to not communicate with each other. In the top right there, silos. I think we all know what that means. In the bottom left, all these signs pointing in a different direction. That's all of the instructions and information people get in our community about how to build a good website, coming from many different people. And then in the bottom right there, that photo of the sweet young girl and her pug, to me, is a representation of people in our communities that just insist on doing things their own way without regard for institutional policies and best practices. And I'm seeing some smiles and hearing some laughter, so I know that you can relate to these experiences. And around 2018, we had an experience that was almost the straw that broke the camel's back. And by camel's back, I mean our web network. We were doing our Drupal 6 to 7 migration, and during this time, we had to put a freeze on new releases. It was very difficult to be responsive to people's requests and incidents that they were reporting. And basically, towards the end of this project, we had this represents what was going on in our community. So almost kind of mass protesting in the streets. People were really unhappy, not only with the way the migration was going, but just the fact that we were on our Drupal platform at all. And a proposal was made towards the end of this project to split our web network in two. So there would have been half of our websites managed by communications, and half of our websites would have been managed by IT, and it would have resulted in a doubling of our infrastructure and our dev teams and our resources. So really an efficient way to update our sites. But thankfully, we had some new directors come in, and instead of splitting our web network in two, we launched what was called the Web Evolution Program. And this was an opportunity for us to redesign our platform, our Drupal-powered CMS, and the services and support that went along with it. But it also gave rise to an opportunity for us to really kind of take a step back and think at a ground level about what makes a good website. So we asked a lot of questions at this point in terms of how to build better websites. And of course, you're here at this event, so you're probably here to learn about some of those things from a Drupal perspective, which is great. But one of the things that I thought about in terms of how to build better websites that I'd experienced working at so many large institution environments, that if you are going to create a better website, a web network, and a web ecosystem, it really needs to be a team experience. Everybody at your institution needs to have a common understanding and a shared goal in terms of what it means to build good websites. And I'm not just talking about the development team and the communications team, but everybody, audience members, people working in different departments who are creating content, really a shared vision for what you're trying to achieve. But there are some problems when it comes to defining a goal for building good websites. And in our case, there were literally thousands of them. And those are all of the documents and PDFs and best practices. And some information is just in people's heads in terms of what are all the requirements that people need to follow to build good websites. And on top of that, there's a little bit of an image problem, I think, with standards, because often when people hear about standards, it's because they've worked on a project, possibly for years, and they're about to launch, and suddenly someone that they've never talked to before is telling them they've done something wrong, and they need to stop their launch, and they need to rebuild some whole section of what they just did. So there was a lot of problems when it came to even talking about standards compliance. And here's where we come back to the Toronto Reference Library, because this is the presentation that I saw this year. Does anybody recognize this person? Hillary Hartley? Okay. Do you work with Hillary, or have you seen Hillary speak? Fantastic. Well, Hillary is the inspiration behind what we're about to talk to you today. So Hillary was at the Toronto Reference Library, and they were talking about the digital service standard for the government of Ontario. And at the time, it was 14 points, points that define and help people who build and produce websites and web services in Ontario to serve people who live and do business in Ontario. And one of the things, the reasons why it caught my eye was because, and this was a little bit of a proud moment for me, I noticed Hillary had mentioned that the size of all of the Government of Ontario sites is basically about the same size as our network and gets the same traffic, which I thought was kind of interesting for a university. But basically, Hillary was here talking about the digital service standard. And I think, had I not seen this presentation, and it's one of the reasons why I love coming to conferences so much, it wouldn't have occurred to me to try and distill all of our documentation and our best practices down to a nice, succinct, user-friendly list. And it's funny because, in the work that we do, we often think about how can we make things more user-friendly for our audiences, but we don't always think about applying that to all of this policy and documentation that we have to work with and that we have to help people establish. So we had this vision that I gained from Hillary, I gleaned from Hillary, that better digital standards could result in improved standards compliance, which could create better websites. And here's our digital standards. We have 9 points. We did a whole benchmarking analysis, by the way, when we created this. And it's one of the shortest lists. I'm happy with that. I'm going to read them out loud. Just so folks in the back of the room might be able to see them or hear them. So on the left there's a reason why this one comes first, be user focused. And in the middle, sorry, I need to look at my notes. I should know these off by heart, I know. Support decisions with data, that's a really important one when we're working with clients, for them to kind of get the idea that you don't make decisions based on your assumptions. You have to support your decisions with data that you're collecting. In the third, at the top there, be consistent. For us, that talks not just about providing a consistent user experience across our 1,000 or 1,500 websites, but it also talks about the fact that we shouldn't be repurposing or duplicating data in multiple places. That consistency relates to content as well. Make sites accessible is in the middle there on the left. That's one we've been working a lot on over the past couple of years. Be thorough in your process, also one that people in higher education sometimes struggle with. The one on the right there, the smiley face, this is my favorite standard and the one that I think most of our site managers struggle with. It's less is more. And I think this creates one of the biggest usability problems at our university. Protect websites and users' data is in the bottom left. Build, evaluate, and revise, and then collaborate and share. So on top of all of our digital standards that we produce, we of course also developed a lot of supporting resources that I think are common in a lot of other universities. We put in place a governance framework. We came up with a suite of education and training initiatives, toolkits and other self-serve resources. We have consulting support for people that are working on large projects. And then we have ongoing communication. So we send out articles and hold events and things like that. So we launched our digital standards, and then we had this wonderful moment where we realized everything was fine and the possibilities were endless, and we were just sailing off into the sunset. Well, this didn't quite happen. And, why not? You might kind of be able to guess why not, perhaps. That was because our documentation that we created was just one more document on top of all that other documentation that currently exists at our university. So even though we created a nice user-friendly resource that people could use, it didn't necessarily mean that they were going to become familiar with it or that they were going to be able to find time in their busy schedules to be able to follow all of the things that we were asking them to do. So this is where our digital standards of practice, community of practice comes into the picture. And if you work in areas related to social sciences, the concept of community of practice might be familiar to you. Is community of practice a term that lots of people are familiar with? Yes. Okay, that's great. So for those of you who may not be familiar, and I wasn't very familiar with it up until a few years back, a community of practice is a group or groups of people who share a concern or passion for something they do, and they learn how to do it better as they interact regularly over time. And as I mentioned, it's most closely associated with areas related to social sciences. And so when we started working on accessibility and EDI related initiatives, that's when I started to hear a lot about communities of practice. It was coined, by the way, by Jean Levey and Etienne Wenger in 1991. So I don't know if this description rings a bell for anyone. A community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or passion for something they do, and they learn to do it better as they interact regularly. So Drupal is powered by an open source community, and open source communities are community of practice. So you are here participating right now in a community of practice. And I love to include this slide. You know, when I do this presentation, it's not always in open source environments. So I think this is a new concept sometimes to people. This idea that, you know, an open source community of practice, I think, is a real key element to the success of our community of practice. I think had we not been part of an open source platform, I think it would have been more difficult for us to work with enterprise vendors, proprietary vendors, and try to produce something like what we have today. So I feel like it's a good lesson for you to consider that as people who participate in a community of practice, you have a platform that is part of a community of practice, implementing and initiating a Drupal or a digital standards community of practice, and can in some ways be a natural extension. So some of the things that I realized when we started to develop our community of practice, by the way, we didn't set out to develop a community of practice right off the get-go. We were focusing more on the things we needed to produce for our community. It was actually our community who started to ask us to put in place initiatives that would develop a community of practice. And it made me realize, you know, that eventually we created this organically over time, but had we thought about this earlier on in the process, I think we could have reaped the benefits of this sooner. And it's something that I think I decided to put this presentation together because I felt like you could perhaps benefit, others could benefit from our oversight. So some of the questions I could have asked, or we could have asked at the beginning, include questions like, how do we inspire people to share concern or passion for our digital standards? How do we encourage people to continually want to learn about our digital standards? And how do we make it possible for people to interact as they learn? And when we're thinking about our governance objectives and our policies and our requirements, we don't always think about those things. But now I'm realizing that those things are of key importance to the success, because it's the difference between our document being just a document on top of that pile of policy, and in fact something that people practiced on a day-to-day basis. So I'm just going to go quickly through some of the people who participate in our community of practice and talk about how they participate in our community of practice. They're of course not just our developers and us and the communications, but they're different groups from across our institution, including our institutional stakeholders, our site managers and editors, of course, our developers and system admins, our audience members, our executive staff, and our external partners. And I'm going to start with our institutional stakeholders. They were the first group that we, of course, reached out to. We had, of course, a shared concern or passion with them from the start because they were often the people that were in the position of having to put the brakes on these projects and tell them, that you can't move forward. Here, by the way, is the process we followed when we launched our own digital standards. We started in the benchmarking analysis, and then we audited all that documentation that I showed you on that wide slide where I was kind of flashing all those pictures on the screen. And then we conducted, it took months to do, interviews and workshops with these key stakeholders across campus. So these were people in legal services, of course, various teams in our IT department, our libraries, our equity team, and our Office for Student Accessibility, Achievement, and Success, which at the time was our Office for Students with Disabilities. So really a very broad cross-section of people across our community. So again, these were the people that often had to play this role. If you remember this slide, telling people to put the brakes on. So they were the people that I think were the biggest partners with us in this project. They help us keep the documentation, in addition to helping us identify how to I think, reformat the documentation and identify what the key elements were that we needed to share. They also have committed to helping us maintain it over time. And I think it's that ongoing maintenance that has also created a lot of success across the community. I'll talk about that in a few moments, but basically it established an understanding that it was the de facto documentation for many groups we weren't even trying to reach out to in terms of defining what makes an exemplary website or a web service. So, of course, we also had to engage with our site managers and site editors. This is the group of 1,500 people that I was talking about. In the beginning, we focused most strongly on reaching out with this group and reaching out to this group. And we did, of course, a lot of creation of new resources and support services. So we have monthly training courses that we offer, both mandatory courses that everyone must take, and we have some extra courses that people can take if they're really keen to dive in. We often organize community events. I have a really exciting one coming up. Actually, we're holding it during Indigenous Awareness Weeks next month, and it's going to be about using taxonomy, Indigenous and race taxonomy on our websites, and creating land acknowledgements on our websites, and talking about other aspects of representing Indigenous voices on our websites. I'm really excited. Meetups and community involvement. We have discussion boards, and our discussion boards, at first we focused on, of course, setting them up and generating conversations, but they've kind of become more of, I think, a social kind of experience where our site managers and editors support each other, provide inspiration to each other, and share ideas. So it's really great to see how the discussion boards have taken off, and then opportunities for sharing and collaboration. And I think that's the key element, those items that we initially decided to produce just because we had an understanding that these are things you do when you're trying to educate your community, have turned into shared learning opportunities. So they've become more interactive. They're more about making connections with other people in the community than necessarily making connections with us. And there's definitely a social aspect to it, so it makes a big difference. So engaging our site managers and editors, of course, was a key element. Getting buy-in from developers and system admins. So this is the group that I was mentioning earlier that we didn't necessarily decide or intend to reach out to. They are system admins and developers actually outside of our Drupal-powered CMS. So people that work on platforms, some of them integrate with Drupal, with some of our Drupal CMS, but some of them don't. And they are people that develop our systems, like our admission systems, our course management systems for our students, our emergency notification system. So we found after a while that many of these teams that are not on our Drupal-powered platform began to reach out to us and involve us in their projects without us even asking them to. So it's actually created a situation now, which is kind of a good problem to have. We don't have enough people on our team to participate as much as we'd like with these other projects. But it's very exciting that we've reached this point, and we've taken some steps to make sure that we are now in reaching out to those team members and getting they're generating their interest as they join our community. Securing support from executive staff. This was another group that we didn't necessarily intend to reach out with at the start. They're not the executive staff who manage the documentation and policy that I was talking about. These are executive staff members from across the university, basically everyone who produces content. And the reason why we reached out to them, we have a web advisory committee at McGill. They're part of our community of practice. It's made up of students, faculty, and staff, and various groups from across our university. And they actually initiate or launch a lot of our governance initiatives. So through the Web Advisory Committee, we kind of are encouraging a self-governance, I think, of our community. So it was the Web Advisory Committee who asked us to have these conversations with executive staff members across the university, because they identified that a big problem with our standards compliance was that staff who were working on websites didn't have the time and weren't able to prioritize the things we were telling them to do. So they asked us to have conversations about endorsing and promoting compliance with McGill systems. Are you comfortable endorsing and promoting compliance with McGill systems? And from an executive, a staff member perspective, this means, can you prioritize it in balance with all these other priorities that you have to, invest resources and budget in? How confident are you about ensuring staff have the skills required to create content that aligns with McGill digital standards? A lot of our staff members who are developing websites or creating websites aren't necessarily web professionals. They're teaching assistants and admin assistants and people that are not necessarily only working on websites. So when people are hired for these positions, sometimes the web skills are kind of an extra add-on, when really they should be, considering the importance of websites, a priority in terms of identifying staff when you're vetting staff for new jobs. And then the other question they asked us to have: how confident are you about ensuring staff have adequate time in their work schedules to build sites that comply with digital standards? So on top of all these other priorities that people have, organizing events and doing all these other things, they need the right amount of time to be able to align with the digital standards. So getting support from executive staff was big. And finally, I'm going to wrap up with ensuring awareness from external partners. I don't know other folks in higher ed if you've had this experience, but I think sometimes people in our community see working with external partners as a way around standards compliance. So we wanted to ask ourselves some questions about why this was happening. And we thought to ourselves, is it happening because people are being willfully non-compliant? Or is there some kind of communication breakdown where people aren't getting an understanding that we have institutional requirements that we are mandated by the government to follow? And we identified that it was likely the latter. It was the latter, because now we work a lot more diligently on making sure our external partners are aware of our legal and institutional requirements, their responsibilities as people building websites for our university community, and our recommended actions and resources that exist. And we also, I think, do a pretty good job of promoting partners that we develop, external partners who commit to aligning with our digital standards too. So it's kind of a win-win situation for all of us. So working with our external partners is also a big part of, I think, the success of our projects. So better digital standards results in improved standards compliance, which results in better websites. That's what we set out to do. What we've wound up with is creating better digital standards, which has resulted in a digital standards community of practice, which is what is creating our better websites. So I'll just give you a few, again, glimpses of what's currently in the pipes for us related to our digital standards community of practice. The success and our ability to launch some of these projects, I don't think would have been possible if we had not had a digital standards community of practice. This we probably could have launched, but I don't think it would have the same uptake. We launched our McGill DS, our design system, at the beginning of this year. I'm so excited about it. Anyone else have design components? Yes, so we're really excited because this is a new thing for us where we now have the ability to have some control over our branding and alignment with our best practices, both within the WMS and external platforms outside of the WMS. And so we have consistent, I have this vision of all of our web spaces being consistent across the board. But this opens up an opportunity for that. So I'm excited about what this is going to mean both for our web spaces and for our community of practice, because it's going to broaden our discussions. Our Drupal 9 upgrade, Drupal 10 upgrade, is in progress right now. Hopefully this one goes better than our Drupal 6 to 7 migration. But one of the things that we've done differently this time is a lot of our change management has been informed by discussions with our community practice, particularly with our web advisory committee. So that's pretty exciting. And we are also doing a better job of working with our clients with our digital journey maps. And I was going to show our digital journey maps, but I forgot to add them into this presentation before I shared them to the slide. Does other people do journey mapping here and others? Yeah, I was really excited actually when Dries talked about experiences, AI generated experiences, because we have these new digital journey maps, and I think, wouldn't it be great to be able to take the feedback that we've gotten in our journey maps about all our student touch points as our students arrive at McGill, settle in and learn to use our systems and our services, and track their progress towards graduation. If we could use that map to, maybe come up with some experience that was, generated somehow with AI. Anyways, I'm really excited about what we can do with our journey mapping. Our 2018 project for digital journey mapping, we recognize there were a lot of things we didn't do great about it. I'm going to actually present about it at future presentations, because in 2018 we did a journey map. It did a lot for us in terms of helping us identify things we needed to do with our homepage on our website, our undergraduate admissions project, our program finder tool, but it didn't really inform all the other projects across campus that it could have. So it really I think there was a lot of lost opportunity there. So this time around, we not only used our digital standards community of practice to have early discussions about the project itself, but we're also now continuing to have discussions about how our journey map relates to everybody's websites across McGill. The other thing we didn't do the first time around is we weren't very careful about working with or ensuring participation from our non-dominant groups at McGill. So there wasn't really great representation from some of the key areas that should have been represented in our digital journey map. So we worked with our partners, who we now collaborate very closely with across campus, to ensure good representation from Francophone students, which of course is important at McGill, and all students are important, Indigenous students, Black students, first generation students, and other non-dominant audience groups that we wanted to ensure were included in the digital journey map. And of course, a revamp of our digital standards. We're doing some usability testing. Every year we evaluate our digital standards with our key stakeholders and update it. But we're doing some usability testing, and we're going to particularly look at revising the build, evaluate, revise, and collaborate and share standards, because I think there are two standards that I feel could, a lot of people are asking us about as they're trying to reduce content on their site, as they're trying to follow the other standards, but I think that they are misunderstood, so we're working on developing those. So what have we learned? These are the last few slides, by the way. We set out to create our better digital standards governance framework, education and training, toolkits and other self-serve resources, consultation support for large projects. But what are some of the things that are more important that have created our digital standards community of practice? That's providing opportunities for shared learning and interaction, encouraging collaboration, establishing discussion forums, and promoting community member successes. And these are the things that I understand are truly important in terms of ensuring good web governance and standards compliance at our university. And more importantly, it's a good way to have fun and meeting new people. Thank you very much. Oh, anyone have a question? Sorry, I went over. No?
Well, I have a question for representation. I think it's a very important aspect of like involving audiences. And I know from experience that by volunteer, like if you ask people to volunteer, you often don't get a good representation of the whole group. So how did you make sure that you had like a good representation of your audiences?
That's a really good question. And that was, I think, the thing that we didn't do great the last time around. We just sent out a general call for participants. And of course, we got a general swath of students who didn't represent our non-dominant groups. So this time around, we worked specifically with our community members in our equity office, on our anti-Black racism team, in our Indigenous Initiatives office, who organize events and are very engaged with, and we also reached out to a lot of student groups on campus too. And so we were more kind of careful, and we thought more carefully about how we were encouraging participation from people. So that's that. Great. One more question? Yes?
Which software are you using to collect all the comments, all the statistics, advertising?
How are we collecting statistics? Which software are we using? In terms of data collection on our Drupal-powered CMS,
Yeah.
We don't have. There's a presentation someone's doing, I think later on this afternoon, that I'm interested in going to about, I think it's Humber College that's going to do it, and it's about data on Drupal, because we use Google Analytics, we use Hotjar, and we use Optimal Workshop to do audience research. And then our digital journey mapping, we conduct interviews, so it's more kind of a person-to-person experience in terms of gathering data. But I am really curious to see what tools are being used in Drupal to collect data in an automated way. So we don't have a tool for that, by the way. So that's a good question to ask. I'm asking that question too. Thanks. Great. I know I've gone over, so maybe it's best we wrap up there. Okay, thanks everybody.
Let's give a warm round of applause to Joyce. And